Part 60. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 599. Because, 3 hours, time is up. When Subai said these words, a brief silence suddenly appeared in the hot spring pavilion. Haha, you are not the audience in this story world. After a moment of dead silence, there was an almost angry roar. Then, all the bloodlines began to cut Subai's hand that was holding the embryo tightly. Obviously, the blood corpse was not as sure as his tone. Now, it was a bit hysterical. But you, are just a puppet, a prop, my trophy. Subai let out a roar, and when he was almost about to die, a white light appeared on his body. In an instant, the white light disappeared, and the blood-red embryo disappeared with it. All the bloodlines in the hot spring pavilion disappeared. Sunur, who had lost his restraints, fell to his knees with a pop, his lower abdomen was filled with blood, and his intestines had slipped out. The noble lady who was standing there lost all support, and fell backwards into the dry hot spring pool behind her. Blood and the smell of blood seemed to have become the theme of this place that was supposed to be a health resort at this time. However, no matter how thick the blood or the pungent smell of blood, it is destined to slowly disappear with the passage of time. People often praise time, the ability to heal the scars in the heart, but in fact, things change and people change, which is what time is best at. At this time, the sound of gurgling came, and hot springs emerged from several openings that were originally dry to lead to the hot springs. Soon, the entire pool was filled with scalding water. The corpse driver didn't deceive the old shopkeeper. Here, hot springs will really appear, but the corpse collector who is looking at feng shui and the old shopkeeper who paid people to build it didn't know that they actually couldn't see this day coming. Wisps of black breath drifted out from the body of the noble lady in the hot spring pool, and resentment began to slowly gather. What the noble lady was carrying was not actually a blood corpse. The blood corpse merely possessed her and allowed herself to repossess the newborn baby. The baby's original soul had been suppressed and sealed by the blood corpse. The fact that the baby's original soul was not dispersed or refined does not mean that the blood corpse suddenly became merciful. Judging from his previous performance in massacring all the senior listeners in Shaanxi province to build Jingguan, he is by no means a soft-hearted person. It's just that the baby's body is only 3 months old, when it is the most fragile and delicate, and it still needs its original soul to maintain the activity of the body. However, this baby, who was not born and had not had time to take a look at the world, simply lost the possibility of coming out of the mother's body and becoming a living person in the world with the failure of the blood corpse. Reluctance, anger, injustice, and all kinds of negative emotions began to fill his heart. Coupled with the infection from the breath of the blood corpse, he was slowly accumulating resentment and turning into a ghost baby. Of course, this process will take a long time. At least, it will not become a climate phenomenon in the near future or within half a year. As for the specific time, possible. Perhaps. It must have been one night. Because, 3 men would suddenly appear in the hot spring pool and wake him up. Hoo. On the banks of the Huangpu River, when the coolness of the morning was getting stronger, a man's figure appeared. The man is walking alone on the concrete path here. From the back, he looks a little desolate, but not lonely. He is completely unworthy of the decadent non-mainstream photos of him pulling down his clothes or holding a cigarette in his mouth. Compared with him, at this time, the old people who were doing morning exercises hadn't gotten up yet, but many young people who were rushing to catch the subway to go to work had already appeared on the roadside. Some of them were holding hot buns or egg pancakes they had just bought and were munching on them. I ate big bites just because I didn't want to wait until I got on the subway before finishing my breakfast. They are humble, they are persistent, with a little confusion, but also with a kind of tenacity that belongs to young people. Living in a big city is not easy, Especially living in a big city like Shanghai is even more difficult. Subai leaned on the railing, with his back to the Huangpu River, looking at the hurried peers of his own age in front of him, and couldn't help but reach out and touch his pockets. Hee. The clothes were also restored by the broadcast, and the smoke in the clothes was naturally restored. In the story world before, Subai habitually wanted to take out a cigarette several times, but the result was that the cigarette was soaked because of the mandarin ducks playing in the water with Kangzi at the beginning. In addition, Jamai, with the advent of cigarettes turned directly into popsicles, which naturally became useless. At this time, he took out a cigarette, tapped it on the palm of his hand, bit it in his mouth, lowered his head slightly, lit the cigarette, took a puff, blew out a faint smoke ring, and then naturally placed the hand holding the cigarette on the railing. On one side, gently shake out the ashes. Looking at the hurried young people in front of me, some of them may live nearly 2 hours by subway from where they work, which means they spend nearly 4 hours a day commuting to and from work. On the road, because the further away you go, the cheaper the rent will be. There is nothing worth it, and there is no need to discuss whether it is worth it or not. Perhaps, many of them can choose to return to their hometowns, find a stable job, take the civil service examination, and rely on family connections to send gifts to enter some institutions. However, life may be a kind of tossing. Without the meaning of tossing, it seems that life has lost most of its meaning. Carefully protecting his fragile self-esteem, he struggled to move forward in the bottom of the big city where money worship was infiltrated. He transformed himself into tiny blood vessels that were almost invisible and integrated into the city, but it was difficult to truly integrate into the city. It makes this cold city a little warmer. A smile appeared at the corner of Subai's mouth. Yes. He was laughing at them, these young men. At this time, Subai, who didn't need to run for his life, while others were still rushing on their way. He could still stand on the roadside and light a cigarette leisurely, which was enough for Subai to attract the envious eyes of the office workers. However, who could have known that this young man standing on the side of the road smoking a cigarette calmly seemed to be out of tune with the fast pace of the city? What if he just returned to this world after going through a life and death struggle? Halfway through the cigarette, Subai felt that he was satisfied. He stood up and was about to leave. He remembered that he had parked the car on the side of a nearby road. At the same time, Subai gently raised his right hand and waved to the sky. Got the trick? Thank you for the cigarette. Thanks to the radio for restoring cigarettes and allowing me to have a cigarette to smoke after just finishing a story world. Subai didn't see his car. Perhaps it had been towed away by the traffic police calling a tow truck. In this way, the 3 hours in the reward actually refer to the 3 hours counted from when he jumped down from the top. Time does not refer to the real world. Perhaps, in the broadcast's recognition, only when you jump down from there can you truly enter the plot, and time can start to count. But this is also a bit bad. If it had only been 3 hours in the real world, there would have been a sticker on the roof of my car, but now I don't even have the car anymore. Sitting down by the curb, Subai stuffed the cigarette butt into the gap in the sewer at his feet, and then took out his mobile phone. Child, are you okay? Subai sent Fatty a WeChat message. The fat man didn't reply, he was probably still asleep. Subai then sent one to the monk. About 5 minutes later, the monk replied, which was a picture of the little guy cuddling with Jixiang and sleeping soundly. Are you back? The monk sent a message asking. Well, I'm back. It's good to be back. The phone was flipping constantly on his fingertips. At this moment, Subai suddenly wanted to have breakfast first. He was relieved that the little guy was still safe. As for Suner and Chuzhao, they probably hadn't started yet. Come out of the story world, as to whether they can come out alive. Let's leave it alone for now. He wanted to take a taxi, but suddenly felt a little pretentious that taking a taxi or an express train was a bit too much. Although for Subai, Shanghai was just a city where he lived. Or in a more strict sense, compared to my own body, I am just a guest. But since I have just stepped out of the story world, and since I finally have this sentimental atmosphere, let's let this atmosphere last longer. I'm hungry. Please treat me to breakfast. Subai sent this message to Ying. For a long time, no reply. Subai smiled, stood up. Never mind. Stop being pretentious, just take a taxi home and sleep. At this moment, the phone vibrated. Where are you? Subai sent his location and added a sentence, dress nicely. I say, young master, are you hungry from above or from below? This is not the right time to say such vulgar and explicit words on this sad morning. Ying. I like your outfit of black stockings and leather boots. Subai thought about it and sent it again. Put your phone back in your pocket. Subai put his hands in the waistband of his trousers, and a female white-collar worker who was rushing to the subway station while holding a makeup box to touch up her makeup passed by Subai. Call. Subai whistled at her. The pretty face of the female white-collar worker glared at the prostitute she met so early in the morning with a cold look. But when she saw that handsome and angular face, the anger in her heart disappeared unconsciously, and the corners of her mouth showed a smile. A small arc, but her footsteps did not stop and she continued to leave in a hurry. Life. There seems to be a new temperature at this time. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 600. Harmonized. In the ramen shop, Subai and Ying were sitting face to face. With Ying's attire at this time, it was really difficult for the other male diners around her not to take a sneak look at her, but everyone knew in their hearts that this woman was nothing. The person you strike up a casual conversation with, her bag, her clothes, and her overall temperament do give people a daunting sense of self-awareness. Ying wanted a small bowl of ramen, while Subai wanted a large bowl with beef. Ying didn't have a very good appetite, so most of the time she was watching Subai eat with big mouthfuls. After finishing the noodles and drinking the soup in the bowl, Subai touched his pocket with satisfaction and took out a cigarette. Ying took the initiative to pick up the lighter that Subai put on the table and helped Subai light a cigarette. Subai nodded to Ying. When will you go to my place for another treatment? Ying asked with some anticipation. Let's give it a while. Now I guess I really can't control it, Subai replied honestly. In his mind, the queen's outfit that Ying wore when she treated herself for the first time naturally appeared in her mind. That's really a pity. By the way, is your detective agency still open? Why do you ask this suddenly? There are some problems with the building over there. There is a job company that wants to occupy the floor where I am. They plan to buy out our lease and compensate us. The price is very good. I have decided to agree to move the studio to another location. You can go to my place. Just ask the management there for the key. I shouldn't go back to work during this period, Subai said. Haha, the young man is different. Even though he is so poor that he doesn't even have the money to eat a bowl of ramen, he still doesn't pay attention to these tacky things. I'm used to being prodigal. Subai laughed at himself and stood up. Send me back. Good. The two walked out of the ramen shop. The sun was shining brightly outside. After I relocate my studio, I plan to go out and relax. Okay, where do you plan to go? Subai asked casually. Dolly, maybe. A good friend of mine from college has opened a B/U0026B in Dolly. I plan to stay there for a month. You'll actually get tired of seeing Kangshan and Erhai Lake in a month. It depends on your mood. As soon as the two got into the car, Subai's cell phone rang. Suddenly, Subai's hand trembled slightly, as if he was afraid to pick up the phone. Ying noticed this detail, but she didn't say anything. She pretended she didn't see it and didn't rush to start the car. After a while, when the phone continued to ring, Subai picked it up and pressed answer. "Hello. Subai, it's me." Chu Zhao's voice came from the other end of the phone. Subai pursed his lips and continued, "What's wrong?" In fact, Subai knew roughly what would happen, but he couldn't help but roar in his heart. Why? I have entered the story world and done so many things, am I still unable to change the ending? A feeling of powerlessness spread throughout Subai's body. "Sooner, something happened to Sooner," Chu Zhao said anxiously. "I remember that he entered the story world 2 days after me. I called her today, and it turned out that her mother answered the phone. I asked Sooner who there, her mother immediately started crying. After her mother finished crying, a man next to me picked up the phone and scolded me, saying that his daughter had been in a car accident and died more than half a year ago, so why should I deliberately call her to provoke his wife? Those were Sooner's parents. They said that they had kept Sooner's mobile phone after Sooner passed away. They charged it every day and still carried it with them to remember her. I just checked the alumni circle of friends and some online social circles of several government departments related to Sooner. Judging from the information feedback there, in their opinion, Sooner really had already after her death. Many classmates and colleagues posted condolences to her in articles and on their WeChat moments. "Where are you now?" Subai asked, his voice a little cold, because Chu Zhao lied to himself. "I'm on the road and I don't know where you live. I'm next to the school on Hepping Road. I'll wait for you at the school gate later." "Okay, I'll be right over." Hang up the phone. The cigarette in Subai's hand burned a lot, and the ashes fell on Ying Ying's car. Subai stretched out his hand to gently dust off the cigarette ashes, and said apologetically, "Sorry for dirtying your car." "It's okay." Ying Ying unlocked the car door. Subai opened the door and got out of the car. "Then, I'll leave first," Ying Ying said to Subai, who was standing outside the car. "Next time if you want to be sentimental, you can continue to date me." Subai waved to Ying Ying, who also started the car and left. When Ying Ying's car drove away, Subai held the cigarette butt in his palm, then spread his hand and dropped the cigarette butt. "Young man, why are you so unqualified? I cleaned it twice in the morning, and every time there were new cigarette butts," a cleaning lady shouted rudely to Subai with a broom and dustpan. "Road. I'm sorry, there won't be a next time," Subai said. "I hope there will be a next time." The cleaning lady had just swept the cigarette butts in and wanted to raise her head to teach the young man a few more lessons. However, she found that the young man who was standing in front of her suddenly disappeared. Looking around, there was no one there. The cleaning lady took off her hand and rubbed her eyes, and said with some fear, "Yao Xiao, I've been staying up late and watching dramas these past few nights, which makes people hallucinate during the day. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 601. At the school gate, Subai smoked one cigarette after another. It was the peak time for students to go to school. Many students walked past Subai. The two guards in the guard room stared at Subai, seeming to hesitate. "Do you want to go up and advise the smoking gentleman not to smoke standing at the school gate so as not to have a bad impact on the future flowers of the motherland?" However, when they just decided to walk out, a police car drove over and the man got into the police car. The two young doormen were a little stunned when they saw this scene. Are the police so friendly and attentive to the people now that they would be taken back to the station even if they were standing in front of the school to smoke? Sitting in Chu Zhao's car, Subai chose a comfortable position for himself, leaning his head against the car window, his eyes a little wandering, as if looking at the street scene flashing past outside the window or in an aimless void. Chu Zhao's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. He didn't speak, and Subai didn't continue to ask. What we want to go to now is the cemetery. No matter what happened, no matter what the explanation was, it seemed that the best ending was right there, in front of Sunar's tombstone. I have no more cigarettes, Subai suddenly said. Chu Zhao was surprised and looked a little panicked. The police car suddenly veered out and almost entered the wrong lane. There happened to be a traffic policeman on duty next to him, but he pretended not to see it. Although they were not from the same department, they were selling each other. Saving face is always necessary. Passing his cigarette to Subai, Subai shook the cigarette case, then bit a cigarette without lighting it. Chu Zhao handed over his lighter, but Subai ignored it and just chewed the filter tip gently. In fact, tobacco no longer has any anesthetic effect on Subai's nerves. The reason why he smokes sometimes is probably just a habit, like scratching his head and shaking his feet. Chu Zhao seemed very nervous all the way. Although he was trying his best to restrain himself, he still showed a sense of unnaturalness. Although he rose up the ranks in the criminal police team, Subai knew that many times, Chu Zhao still looked too young in front of him. In the story world of Mr. Zombie, when Subai appeared, Chu Zhao had already passed out. At that time, when Lu Tong and others left, Chu Zhao chose to stick to it. Even though Chu Zhao knew that his strength was not enough for the blood corpse, he still did not choose to leave, but continued to stay with Sunar. At that time, Subai was slightly surprised in his heart. In a trance. An emotion that I had been indifferent to for a long time was gently touched at that time. In the circle of listeners, stabbing each other in the back and killing fellow Taoists rather than dying as poor Taoists is the real theme. That kind of stupidity, that kind of naivete, that kind of persistence in choosing to face death for the sake of so-called friendship, for absolute for most listeners, it is already a bit distant and unfamiliar. These chicken soup stories for the soul that are often sung and appeared in various magazines and publications may be quite common in the real world, but among the audience in the world of stories, they are as rare as a feather. Only people. After all, it will change. Even if Chu Zhao chose to stick to it and face the danger with Sunar, it is very likely that the scene and time will change again and Chu Zhao will be given another choice. Did he kill Sunar to fulfill himself? Or do they both die together? Anyone else would probably struggle again in their hearts. Just like when Wang Jingwei was a patriotic and progressive young man, he sacrificed his life to assassinate senior officials of the Qing court, but later became the Japanese's lackey. Many of the more famous student leaders in the May 4th movement were later they all entered the Wang puppet regime, but the traitor owner of Zhejialu, who was mentioned in the middle school history textbook as burning the Zhejialu, refused to accept the invitation of the Wang puppet government. People's choices and value orientations often really change over time. Chu Zhao may not know that Subai, who was leaning his head calmly against the car window at this moment, was actually thinking about how he would be interrogated and dealt with in front of Sunar's tombstone later. Now that the man has passed away, Subai doesn't have much impulse to avenge Sunar. Yes, whether Subai wants to admit it or not, he really doesn't have that impulse to seek revenge anymore. If Sunar was really killed by another audience, then so be it. Let yourself become a beauty in anger, kill a few listeners, and then be pulled into the world of punishment stories by the broadcast again. Too tired. Too much trouble. Subai didn't have the energy to continue doing this kind of thing. This may be the laziness of human nature, or it can be called the selfishness of human nature. Subai felt that he had done enough and tried his best. Now, what I may need to think more about is, if the future is determined, then should you strive for it now? Try hard or not? What else is the difference? This is the most despairing thing. When you get back, just burn the auspicious painting. There seems to be no difference between having that painting and not having that painting. Seeing the future picture, no matter how hard you try, it can't change at all. That's the most tiring thing. The cemetery has arrived. The desolate atmosphere, the desolate scenery, the clean bluestone aisles. When Subai and Chu Zhao were walking here together, Subai suddenly felt that everything here was exactly the same as the scene in the painting in his memory. Even every fallen leaf that had not been swept away, and even the wind that happened to pick up when passing the third row of tombstones, were exactly as remembered. After working hard for so long, I finally risked my life and the blood corpse to count every second. In the end, I couldn't even change the established trajectory of a fallen leaf. This is really frustrating. This is Sunar's tombstone. Chu Zhao probably got the location of the tombstone from Sunar's relatives. Subai stopped and looked at the tombstone carefully. The tombstone was still a bit new. In the photo, the beautiful woman was smiling like a flower. Suddenly he remembered Sunar's request to him, that is, if she died in the story world, Subai would be responsible for helping her choose a good-looking photo to put on the tombstone. This photo is pretty good. Death was like a lamp going out. Subai slowly squatted down in front of the tombstone, stretched out his hand to rub the edges of the tombstone, and no longer felt the beauty's warmth. There was only coldness left in the touch. The girl who would stand there with a smile to pick her up from the plane, the girl who said she wouldn't mind being a stepmother for her son, the girl who would cook for her, the girl who liked to follow her and pull her when she was young. The girl who plays real CS. Gone. I don't know when I will die, Chu Zhao said sadly. You are going to die now. This sentence echoed in Subai's heart. Originally, Subai had no intention of killing Chu Zhao, but it seemed that he was moved by the situation, or maybe he was disgusted by Chu Zhao's self-questioning. In short, Subai really had the urge to smash his head open with this guy who obviously had something to hide. From beginning to end, from the beginning to now, Subai never denied that he was an emotional creature. Many times when things came, some pros and cons, some punishments would be left behind by Subai. When Subai slowly stood up, Chu Zhao was still talking to himself, so, I chose a tombstone for myself, right next to this one. Subai frowned slightly and looked to the side. He saw a brand new tombstone with a photo of Chu Zhao on it. The photo was taken by Chu Zhao in police uniform. He was very energetic and sunny. And this is for you, Subai. A familiar voice sounded from behind Subai, and Subai turned around suddenly. Just now, Subai was completely immersed in sadness, and did not even release his consciousness to scan the surroundings. Therefore, when this woman walked behind him and spoke, Subai really noticed her arrival. Sunar was wearing a black dress, a plain flower on her head, and a white pearl necklace around her neck. She was looking at Subai with a smile. This. All of these. What is going on? Subai was a little dazed. Even at this moment, he suddenly had a short circuit in his thinking, because the scene in front of him completely destroyed all Subai's previous mental construction. It was not because Sunar's resurrection from the dead was such a huge surprise to Subai, but because Subai seemed to see traces of changes in the future. Although the picture was still the same and nothing seemed to have changed, Subai had a hunch that, in fact, it had changed. You will definitely not be able to spot the lies Chu Zhao made up, because you basically don't look at Moments or other social chat software. In fact, if you look through it yourself, you will find that Chu Zhao lied to you. Sunar walked up to Subai and seemed to be very satisfied with Subai's shock. Immediately afterwards, Sunar's face touched Subai's chest. I have chosen a cemetery for the three of us. Although our relationship is becoming more and more distant now, I hope that one day, after we die one by one, we can still be neighbors together, and we can joke together like we did before. Let's play together, even if we are ghosts. Let's float out of the cemetery together to eat kebabs and drink beer at the barbecue stalls at the night stalls. Subai was startled. He saw his own tombstone on the left side of Sunar's tombstone. Immediately, Sunar deliberately lowered his voice and gritted his teeth angrily. Also, you bad guy, you actually put your hand into someone's stomach at that time. In the future, if you get drunk one day, even if someone wants to take the opportunity to have something happen with you, will you still feel that way? Will the shadow just die? Maybe Subai lowered his head, subconsciously trying to find Sunar's lips. He vaguely remembered the taste of Sunar's red lips last time. Virtue. Sunar pushed Subai away, pointed at Chu Zhao and said, "Hey, someone has been snickering next to you for so long. Have you laughed enough?" Without. Chu Zhao continued to smile while wiping his tears. At this moment, the three of them really felt like they were back in time. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 602. The quiet and good years often become more valuable after things and people change. It is precisely because you realize that you have lost it that you can evoke the faint feeling of reluctance in your heart. However, when you have it, you often don't notice it, and naturally you can't talk about how to cherish it. Everyone's choice, everyone's path, is different. Sunar is no longer the sweet girl that Subai remembered in the past. Perhaps, she had already changed before she entered the story world and became an audience. Becoming a military attaché in a foreign embassy, and reaching this position at this age in the real world, is already considered to have a bright future and outstanding achievements. Compared with Subai, who was still enjoying the group's dividends and living a young life, Sunar actually to a certain extent, he matured much earlier than himself. It's just that the two of them have a tacit understanding, which has kept their relationship together in the carefree time when they first met in their teens. Just like before, Subai drove his new luxury car, took Chu Zhao and Sunar out for a ride, and then parked the car at the entrance of an alley. The three of them pulled up a plastic stool and sat down, ordering beer and barbecue, and ate happily. Sunar, who has an extremely beautiful temperament, Subai, who is a rich young man, and Chu Zhao, who likes to make jokes, hang out together carefree. Sometimes Chu Zhao would tease Subai about whether he could support some of his favorite starlets besides changing cars. Sunar would ridicule Chu Zhao's father for continuing to pressure him to go to the police academy, but he didn't dare. While resisting, Subai lamented that Sunar couldn't wear the luxurious jewelry he gave her to work because of her status. At this time, the food stall owner would often bring a plate of barbecue and a beer with a smile, and watch the three young people bragging and eating in his shop, while he would take a break to light a cigarette and secretly take advantage of the "when my mother-in-law is away, I think about my first love, and wonder whether my first love, who was good looking at the time, has been tempered by life and turned into a waste like my mother-in-law." Even later, when Subai went to college in Nanjing alone, Sunar entered the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as an intern, and Chu Zhao obediently went to the police academy and graduated as a police officer before Subai. The three of them still often looked for opportunities. Get together. When Subai said that he wanted to kill someone during a chat, Sunar and Chu Zhao, who were a little tipsy, immediately raised their wine glasses and touched them. One was seeking excitement or was aware of Subai's psychological problems, so he felt a little distressed. Wanting to help, the other is motivated by the rebellious psychology of the police profession. Life needs stimulation, because people are like sponge bodies. If things are calm, you don't even feel that you are still alive. When a needle pierces your body, the spasms all over the body will not only give you pain, but also give you pain. Give you a message that you are still alive. Perhaps, this kind of life could have continued. Even if there were any problems in the killing club, relying on the relationship between the three people's families, it would not be a big problem. But when the radio entered the lives of the three people, a huge change has occurred. The selfishness of human nature, the weaknesses of human nature, and the unbearable side of human nature are amplified by broadcasting, and the good things become more and more blurred. The current relationship and situation between the three people are actually reasonable. However, this did not prevent Subai from standing in the cemetery and looking at the tombstones of himself, Suner and Chu Zhao side by side. As Suner said, perhaps, only after the three of them died one after another, only when we are neighbors here can we find the original beauty and purity. As for now, it is obviously impossible. Let's go have a barbecue, Chu Zhao suggested. Just think of it as a celebration of our successful completion of a story world. Then let's go to the one we often went to before. I haven't been there for a long time, Suner said. After saying that, both of them looked at Subai. Obviously, they were a little worried that Subai would refuse according to his usual habit. After all, Subai's attitude towards the two of them in the past year or two had been deliberately alienating them. I'll go too. Subai thought about it and decided not to ruin the atmosphere. Chu Zhao made it known that he was using the bus privately, and drove the three of them straight to the barbecue restaurant in a police car. However, it was only early in the morning, not even noon, and the barbecue restaurant hadn't opened yet. The barbecue stall that Subai and others used to frequent has obviously moved away, which makes the three of them feel a little sad and regretful. Come on, brothers, please use my official tools for private use. Don't look at me through colored glasses. Chu Zhao picked up his cell phone and dialed the number on the barbecue stall's sign. The boss was obviously asleep. Chu Zhao called him and pulled him up. Before a quarter of an hour had passed, the boss was riding a motorcycle carrying his. The woman rushed over. Although you are doing this so that we can have barbecue, I still have to despise you habitually. Subai gave Chu Zhao a middle finger. Officer Chu, your official authority is so powerful now. You are bullying ordinary people. If we open the door early and cook barbecue for you, aren't you afraid that someone nearby will take a few photos and post them on Weibo to make you popular? Hey, I'm so eager to do this. I've solved a lot of cases in the past year. It just gives me a boost of popularity first, so that the self-righteous trolls on the internet think I'm a bad policeman and bully the people to mess me up. Damn it, after it became popular, our Public Security Bureau's official WeChat account posted all the cases I had recently solved one by one, and it made a big turn, and my popularity and career were suddenly opened up. Routine. Suner covered her mouth and laughed. Celebrities can use it, but the police can't, Chu Zhao also said with a smile. Besides, now netizens are no longer led by a few public figures as before. I guess in the eyes of most people, a person who has repeatedly broken the law is the policeman who has arrested many bad guys, likes to come to the food stall street to show off his power and enjoy a bite of barbecue when he is not busy. This is already a very honest and noble example. The three of them sat down on the plastic stool while continuing to chat casually. They all agreed not to talk about the radio or the story world. The reason why they gathered here this time was just to find the feeling from before and regain the feeling. Aftertaste, so try to ignore the identity of your audience. The boss was actually a bit old, but he could still tell that he was still strong. Chu Zhao police cars were standing next to him. For people who made a living by doing small business, they naturally did not dare to provoke the police, so they quickly raised the charcoal fire. The good sauce started to be made, just because I missed 2 hours of sleep today and opened the door early. No matter what I felt in my heart, at least I had a cheerful smile on my face. Come on, let's take a photo together. If someone dies one day, it's convenient to remember him, right? Chu Zhao suggested. The boss had just brought over a plate of roasted eggplants. He was a little surprised to see that the policeman spoke so unreliably, but he did not dare to say anything more and went back to continue baking. Okay, I'll take the photo. Suner picked up the phone, raised it above his head, and included himself and Subai in the camera lens. Wait a minute, here I am. Chu Zhao immediately stood up and got together. The three people, three upper bodies, were close together and all entered the camera. Suner adjusted the angle and was not in a hurry to take the picture. Damn, you're actually posing for a photo at this time, adjusting the angle to make your face slimmer, scheming girl. What's the matter, I'm doing this for your own good. When I die one day, you can at least see my beautiful side when you miss me. This way, you will at least miss me more comfortably, right? Sooner adjusted the angle. He pressed the shutter button several times in succession and said, "It's done. I'll send it to your WeChat first and then print it out when I get back." At this time, Subai's cell phone rang. Subai answered the call. It was his cousin. "Hello, cousin, my aunt left Subai's phone number last time, but Subai didn't note their mobile phone number." "Well, what's wrong?" "Your brother-in-law has come back from Japan." "Are you still in Shanghai?" "You didn't come to our wedding. So I want to make up for you this time. At least let your brother-in-law show his face in front of you, right?" Subai was slightly startled. "He is back." Subai's mind immediately thought of the dressing table in the bedroom and the nail scratches on the mirror. His cheap mother once sat in front of the dressing table, leaning sideways, rubbing her fingers in the mirror and looking at the wedding photo for a long time. Subai would not believe that that woman was really savoring her niece's happiness. "Okay, when?" "Let's eat out tomorrow night, Kem's Hotel, eating Western food." "Okay, I get it. Then it's settled, but we must not let our pigeons go." "Don't worry, it won't happen." "Well, see you tomorrow night, cousin." The cousin hung up the phone, while Subai held the phone and fell into deep thought. "What's wrong?" Suner asked. "Is something wrong again?" Subai nodded. "It's just a small thing, it doesn't matter." "Then let's go one more time." Chu Zhao raised his wine glass. "I don't know when the next time I'm in this mood to drink together." The three of them clinked their wine glasses and drank them all in one gulp. Finally, it was Chu Zhao who paid the bill and gave the boss an extra 100 yuan as a reward for opening the business early. Then Chu Zhao looked at Subai. "Do you want me to take you back?" Neither he nor Suner knew where Subai lived now, so they asked. Subai shook his head. "No, I'll take a taxi back myself." "Okay." Then Chu Zhao got into the car, and Suner also got into the car. After saying goodbye to Subai, Chu Zhao started the car and drove away. Subai walked slowly alone on a cold street of food stalls. "She's back, and he's back," Subai murmured to himself. Is it really just a coincidence? Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 603. When I returned home, the lights in the living room were turned off. The fat man and the monk were not at home. Only Gyatso, who had just taken a shower, came out. "Where are they?" Subai asked. "I took my children to watch a movie." "I'll be back later," Gyatso said. "Oh." Subai nodded, then picked up a clean towel and planned to take a shower first. After coming out of the story world and having a barbecue, he had to take a shower to feel refreshed. "How do you feel?" Gyatso asked. "I feel that your body seems to be more condensed." "This is really scary." "Where is the ancient corpse we agreed on?" Subai asked. "We are starting to ask people over there to transport it. We have to go through security checks and ensure safety, so it will take a little longer. I think it will take another week." "Haha, thank you for your hard work." Subai smiled and walked into the bathroom. When the cold water poured out from the shower head, Subai felt a sincere feeling of comfort. The blood corpse should have been forcibly taken out of the story world as a prop, but according to the broadcast certification, it was a special item that was not allowed to be taken out by the audience. Therefore, the embryonic baby went back and forth from where it came. It was humanely destroyed by radio. After all, the real blood corpse was actually dead long ago, and that person was actually just an NPC created by the broadcast in this story world. After taking a shower, Subai wiped his body and walked out. There were no outsiders at home anyway, and everyone was used to being less restrained. Except for the monk, who came out neatly dressed before and after bathing, the others wore boxer tops at most. Pants. Subai sat down on the sofa in the living room, lit a cigarette, and turned on the TV. The news network happened to be playing on this station, and Subai listened attentively. Since the little guy was taken out to watch a movie by the fat monk, Jixiang would naturally go with him. Gyatso had a cold temperament, so the room was very quiet at this time. Subai, who was lying on the sofa, slowly closed his eyes not long after. "Daddy! Daddy!" When the living room door rang again and opened, Subai woke up leisurely. A little guy with a milky smell all over his body came to him with unsteady steps and fell into his arms. Picking up his son, the little guy let out a chirp and took the initiative to kiss Subai on the cheek. "Haha, who did you learn this from?" Subai stretched out his hand and scratched the little guy's cute nose, and the little guy chuckled. Jixiang walked over slowly and curled up on the carpet next to the sofa, as if taking a nap. "Is the movie good?" Subai asked. "Hey, don't say it. Although it is a 3D animation for children, it is quite interesting. The monk and I both enjoyed it." The fat man took off his coat. "A few of us have eaten outside, you and Gyatso yourself just make do with something to eat." "I'm not hungry," Subai said. When the monk returned home, he went to the kitchen to make tea. At this time, he came over with a teapot, poured 3 teacups, and then sat there calmly holding the teacups. Subai put the little guy next to him and found an anime for him to watch on TV. Then he picked up the teacup and recounted his experience in the last story world while drinking tea. Amitabha is also thrilling, the monk sighed. Indeed, although Subai chose to crush the fox's head directly in the end and then forcibly took away the embryo of the bloody corpse at the last moment, maybe the situation would not be so easy. Moreover, the first choice is actually more difficult than facing the blood corpse embryo. Once you understand it, you understand it. If Subai is even a little bit entangled and hesitant, then things may really get out of hand. It's quite exciting. It's almost like entering the world of the story yourself, Fatty said while peeling the peanuts. "Hey, by the way, Max, I remember you said before that you met a Frankenstein in the real world, right?" "He must be one of his apprentices," Subai said. "I still have his WeChat account on my phone, but that guy hasn't contacted me to ask for anything. I feel like he died at home because of a failed experiment. The results are still there. Not found." "Isn't it in Huayang community?" the fat man asked. "It seems so." "What happened? Did you guys meet?" "Didn't I go to the cinema with the monk and the little guy today? Then my navigation led me to the wrong location and past a community. I said there was evil spirit in the community, and the monk said it was ghost energy. Then what? And because the movie tickets were bought online in advance and couldn't be refunded, I had to go to the cinema to watch the movie first. I was very tired when I came back from the movie, so I didn't bother to go there to check anything else," Fatty said with a shrug. "Hey, one of you is a contemporary eminent monk and the other is a real Taoist, how can you be so devoid of social ethics?" Subai teased. "Do you want to imitate the adoptive father in Spider-Man who told me before he died that with great power comes great responsibility?" The fat man rolled his eyes at Subai. "But if that Frankenstein's laboratory is there? As for the community, there is probably something wrong with the laboratory. It must have something to do with him not contacting you for so long. You are the same. If someone doesn't contact you, you just treat him as if he doesn't exist. So busy. To be honest, this year has been really busy." Subai looked helpless and said, "Things just happen one after another." "What about you now?" Fatty asked. "You always need some rest time." Subai was really too lazy to clean up the mess. "Subai, although you have not funded him, in name, he is actually serving you and doing things for you. If something goes wrong in that laboratory, a community or a large area near the community will be destroyed. If all life is in ruins, then the cause and effect will most likely be calculated on your head." The poor monk thought that it would be better to solve the problem while he had time. When passing by during the day, The evil spirit and ghost energy were not very strong. The other residents in the community should not have been affected, but the evil spirit and ghost energy were actually. It can spread from the room to the community, which can already indicate that there should be something wrong. Okay, just go. Fatty, where's your car? Subai asked. Why, by the way, why didn't I see your pusa when I first came back? It was parked on the side of the road before entering Story World. When I came back, it was gone. The traffic police should have called a tow truck and towed it away. Haha, come on, take my car. The fat man bought a new Audi A6 a while ago. In fact, when this guy was a wandering Taoist priest, running around for free was not his main source of income. He often guest starred in the Feng Shui game of Dingyan Mansion, and he was quite prosperous in Chengdu. However, Wang Lin's incident later awakened the fat man, and he kept a low profile. As for the story later on, the world has become an audience, and naturally I am too lazy to make money from this, but I still have a few million in savings from before. Lord Buddha, Lord Buddha, Lord Buddha, Lafayette. The fat man shouted into the room. Soon, Gyatso came out. Look after the children. The three of us went out to save the people of Li. The fat man pointed at the little guy and said. Subai kissed the little guy on the forehead, then stood up and walked out of the house with the monk and the fat man. After getting into Fatty's Audi, Fatty said to Subai very proudly. After driving Pusa for so long, do you want to try a good car? The fat man patted the steering wheel and showed off to Subai. Virtue Subai was too lazy to pay attention to this idiot. The fat man laughed, started the car and drove out. There was no traffic jam at night, so within 20 minutes, the fat man drove to the gate of the community. Subai lowered the car window and frowned slightly. Why do I feel like this is a leak of mental energy? Wow, it's interesting now. I said it was demonic energy, the monk said it was ghostly energy, and you said it was spiritual power. Yes, Fatty, I am becoming more and more interested. God knows what that apprentice is tinkering with in the laboratory. Get the stuff out. The three people got out of the car and walked directly into the community. The old security guard at the gate guard booth just crossed his legs and dozed there, and did not notice the three people coming in. Of course, even pedestrians who usually approach the community will basically not ask anything. For interrogation, unless you are really unconventional and you can tell at a glance that you are a gangster. It's this room. Subai stood in front of a door and said, but why do I have a feeling that gets weaker and weaker when I get closer to this house? Amitba, this poor monk feels the same way. The monk agreed. Dabai, break down the door, Fatty urged while rubbing his hands. Apparently, Fatty's passion for treasure hunting had been aroused. Subai took out a key card from his pocket. He found it from the bedroom drawer before going out. The boy in red who gave him the key card was a bit memorized and pitiful. Ji Xiang gave him a straight look. The Pa was so frightened that Subai kept the key card as a souvenir. Drop. The door card was successfully swiped, and with a click, the door lock was unlocked, and there seemed to be a push from inside, pushing the door violently open. A burst of black mist swept out, bringing with it a pungent stench. The monk waved the Buddhist beads in his hand, and a golden light appeared, dispersing the black fog, and the situation inside was clearly revealed. What a disgusting thing is this? The fat man reached out and picked up a white, sticky paste-like object from in front of him. This white, sticky paste almost completely covered the floor, walls, and ceiling of the entire house. They even seemed to be squirming slightly in accordance with a certain rhythm, like an extremely huge mite. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 604. Wouldn't you know it after one taste, Subai joked. Haha, fatty, I'm not that cold and careless. The fat man clapped his hands, looked at the monk, and asked, Monk, do you see anything? The monk shook his head. The poor monk can't tell that these white pastes are more like secretions, and the temperature in this room is obviously much higher than outside. There should be a lot of parasites and bacteria in these secretions, it's just because summer hasn't really arrived yet, so they can't spread out for the time being, and they will die quickly if they leave the temperature and humidity of this room. Nima, if all these things spread in the summer, wouldn't it be a new plague? The fat man said with some fear. Dabai, then your sin will be great. Before the outbreak of the plague, the radio should have issued real-life tasks to the listeners for them to come and deal with. Sudbai said. After all, this guy's research object also violated the radio's requirements for the stability of the world, and is not considered to be what this world should develop. Civilization. The three people walked in while talking, and naturally they inevitably got some white paste on their bodies. Damn, it's a bit like taking a bubble bath. It would be even more perfect if there was at this time, the fat man said with some pity. Your life level is naturally not afraid of the influence of bacteria and parasites of this level, but can you imagine the scene of the woman who had the same thing as you just last night, slowly turning black and smelly in front of you? Tch, the fat man gave Sudbai a middle finger, and then suddenly shouted, Here, I stepped on something under my feet. After saying that, the fat man bent down and groped with his hands for a while, then lifted up a blackened and shriveled male corpse. This corpse is so thin that it looks like a dehydrated dried pickled cabbage. It probably can't be turned into a zongzi. The fat man said to himself. It's him. The apprentice Sudbai recognized the identity of the corpse. At first, this guy had promised himself that he would be responsible for helping Sudbai research the necessary medicine or other things, but who would have thought that he would actually? It is indeed a kind of irony that he died here so quietly. However, Sudbai was not too surprised by his death. After all, this guy had never used WeChat to contact him to ask for special materials. Either he had gone to another high-level branch to hang out with other listeners, or something happened to him. Play yourself to death, and obviously, the possibility of the latter is much greater than the former. The monk carefully examined the male body, then shook his head and said, There are no specific external injuries, and the cause of death cannot be found through examination. Why is it so complicated? The fat man said. Look at this guy's eyes wide open and his mouth open. The expression on his face before he died was obviously very scared. He was scared to death. Monk. Sudbai. Why do you look at me like that? Fatty put the body down. I guess he was really scared to death. When I say scared to death, I mean killing people through mental power. Psycho kills people. Sudbai suddenly had an idea in his mind. Frankenstein was actually hanging out with a little girl in the audience. However, Frankenstein had an accident, and the little girl had no choice but to choose one of Frankenstein's companions. The apprentice funded his continued research, and on that day, an accident occurred on the little girl's body, and her brain was dug out and isolated, and she was basically considered dead. In the real world, vegetative state is actually considered a type of death, and this determination is obviously recognized by the broadcast. You can be in a coma, you can be seriously injured, but if your memory is completely erased, you cannot even know that you are. Who is it? Your original conscious existence has also dissipated, so maybe in the broadcast's judgment, you are actually dead. Sudbai remembered that the little girl's brain was stored in a petri dish. Look for a petri dish, about the same size as a wash basin. There should be a brain in it, Sudbai said to the fat man and the monk. What if not? The fat man asked. If not, then you know what happened, Sudbai said. Amitba, is this it? The monk found a transparent petri dish, picked it up and pointed. There is a hole underneath. Sudbai's eyes immediately narrowed. Monk, could you please check the male corpse again, focusing on his head? Hearing this, The monk nodded without asking why. He squatted down and inspected the male corpse again. There was nothing wrong with the front. However, when the monk turned the male corpse over to inspect the back, he was immediately surprised and said, "There is a tiny hole on the back of the head, the size of a pinhole." The poor monk didn't notice it just now. "Hey hey!" The male corpse opened his eyes suddenly, his eyes turned white and his pupils were invisible. At the same time, the temperature in the house continued to rise at this time. "I said, I won't let you go." The harsh female voice spread through spiritual power. Sudbai shook his head in confusion, retarded. The male corpse in front of him suddenly opened his eyes and something was wrong. The monk didn't panic at all. He slapped the male corpse on the forehead. "Town. Buzz." The male corpse trembled, with a look of pain on his face. The fat man sneered at the side and pulled out a piece of talisman paper. The talisman paper burned automatically. He then squatted down and grabbed the man's corpse with one hand by his neck and turned the man's corpse over. At the same time, the burning talisman paper was directly attached to the back of the man's head. "Come on, little darling, get out of here for your fat grandpa." Ah! The screams spread out through mental power, appearing very painful and hysterical. Soon, the back of the man's head began to crack or rot. The originally good back of the head slowly fell off piece by piece, and a groove appeared in the middle. A stench that was difficult to describe in words immediately emitted. "Damn it, Fatty just wants to be a sewer cleaner." The fat man took out a jade bottle from his pocket, poured a few drops of liquid from it onto his palm, spread it, and then stretched his hand directly from the rotten back of the man's head. "Haha, it's so slippery." Plop. A white thing was taken out from the back of the fat man's head and fell on the floor. "Damn, your whole brain has been eaten away by you." The fat man clicked his tongue in surprise. The monk reached out and touched the white thing. There is no specific consciousness. It is obviously erased, but it still retains the last obsession and hatred. In fact, it is similar to a dead ghost, but it has a special carrier, and this carrier also gives it changes that other dead souls cannot have. However, it is very closely connected with the surrounding environment. The temperature in Shanghai is still a bit low now, and it cannot leave this room for the time being. After saying these words, the monk gave Sudbai a meaningful look. "Originally I wanted to keep it for research, but who would have thought that such a change would happen?" Sudbai explained. In the eyes of Sudbai, the monk, and the fat man, the brain's attempt to resist and sneak attack just now was so ridiculous that it was unbelievable. You must know that Sudbai actually had a great advantage in strength when facing this little girl's audience. Now, although the little girl's remaining brain has mutated for unknown reasons, Sudbai has been, his strength has also undergone earth-shaking changes. He is no longer the Wuxiaman of the past, and then this guy still wants to make a sneak attack, which is really a bit taken for granted. No, that's not what the poor monk means. The monk pinched the white thing with 2 fingers and looked at Sudbai with some confusion and continued to ask. What the poor monk meant was, why didn't you just eat it in the first place? "Oh, that's right, your strength at that time was not as strong as it is now, and your spiritual consciousness and soul level were also very different. If you swallow it rashly, your mind may be affected by its obsession with revenge, and you may be prone to accidents." "Monk, what do you mean?" The fat man looked at the monk in surprise. "Do you want to eat it?" The monk placed the white thing in front of the fat man. "It's very satisfying. It won't be a problem for us to resolve its remaining obsession." The fat man hesitated. "Can you please let me order onions, ginger, garlic, and spicy millet when I pass by the night market stalls when I go back later?" "Whatever." The monk nodded, indicating that he agreed with the fat man's statement. "Are you so disgusting?" Sudbai looked at these 2 people speechlessly. "Hey, you have the nerve to make fun of us. The miscellaneous things you have eaten before are not much better than this." It's agreed that I will cook it when we get home later and we can share it together. By the way, I'll leave a copy for Gyatso as well. Subai was too lazy to continue talking to the fat man, but walked into the next room. Subai remembered that the last time he came to this room, he took away many bottles and jars containing medicine. When he came in again, Subai didn't. I saw some bottles and jars, and the shelves were covered with a strange kind of moss. At the same time, when Subai walked into the room, the moss on the ceiling began to slowly grow. Monk, fat man, forget about the late-night snacks, there is a problem here. Subai shouted while observing the moss closely. Aha! A chilling sound came from behind Subai, and a vine made entirely of moss swept directly towards Subai. Subai immediately turned around and slapped his backhand. The vines were scattered, but a layer of green powder remained on Subai's palm. Hiss! At the moment, Subai watched his palm being melted into countless small holes. At the same time, deep in his heart, he also felt an elusive and ethereal feeling, like an ordinary person who suddenly took a large amount of alcohol. Poisons, drugs, and drugs are the same. For a moment, Subai was also a little surprised. What the hell did that guy do? It caused double damage to the body and soul. Perhaps. This is probably the culprit that killed himself. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 605. Subai's palm was immediately covered by a layer of black dragon scales, and the scorching power evaporated all the green particles on his palm. However, the drifting and psychedelic feeling in his heart was somewhat difficult to suppress, but fortunately Subai also, even though he has been through a lot of strong winds and waves, he can at least keep his soul clear and not be like those people who take drugs and can't help but shake their heads and jump to the rhythm without knowing why. The moss seemed to be deflated after launching an offensive. The surrounding moss slowly dimmed and became a little sluggish, as if autumn had come to rob it. At this time, the monk and the fat man also came to the room. The monk immediately realized something when he saw Subai's red eyes. He put his hands together and recited the pure heart mantra. Subai also immediately closed his eyes, and with the monk's blessing, he slowly resolved the restlessness in his heart caused by the strange moss. The fat man was not idle either. He was also staring at the moss around him. After noticing that the moss was slowly shrinking and wilting, the fat man immediately shouted, "Damn, it's trying to run away. This guy has intelligence. The Supreme Lord is as urgent as the law." For Fatty, every time he hunts for treasure, he is the most enthusiastic and eager one. This may be due to Fatty's extreme desire for material things deep in his heart. As an ordinary person, I longed for money. After I became a listener, I developed a special obsession and pursuit of these special gadgets. It was similar to my previous pursuit of money. After all, for the listener, worldly money itself is not that big. Meaning, a pair of small flags as big as a palm was thrown out by the fat man and firmly planted on the floor. Then, the fat man started to move. "Come on, Fatty wants you to run, Fatty wants you to run." About 5 minutes later, with the help of the monk, Subai finally completely resolved the special restlessness in his heart. When he opened his eyes, he saw a green ball the size of a baby's fist in the circle of the fat man's flag. The ball is on the ground, motionless, but it still gives people a very agile feeling. "What is this?" Subai asked. "You ask me, who should I ask?" the fat man asked. "After all, isn't this a thing invented by your men? But take it back first and study it slowly. This thing is extremely corrosive both physically and mentally. Find something to store it in." "Okay, I have a lot of bottles and cans here anyway." The fat man nodded and said, "What should we do here? Shall we do a general cleaning?" "Deploy a magic circle and set fire to it," the monk said. "Then let's notify the neighbors before we go out." The fat man and the monk began to work, while Subai walked out of the house alone, went to the flower garden of the community, and lit a cigarette. The injury on his palm had recovered, and it was nothing serious. Looking at the time, it was already past midnight. At night after the day, I had to go to an appointment. That my cousin-in-law was probably really me. At least, for now, some clues and phenomena did point to this guess. Does the woman's return have something to do with him? After all, that one is her true son. However, the water inside was a bit too deep, and Subai had a vague feeling that whether it was him or that guy, in fact, for that man and woman, there was basically no relationship between parents and children. It's a pure relationship. Judging from the attitude between a man and a woman, it's hard for you to imagine that they would combine to give birth to the next generation. And he did not hesitate to arrange such a big game for the next generation. Moreover, the real self has been locked in a bronze box for a long time, which is even more intriguing. The middle-aged firefighter Subai met in Tianjin before had the image of a father in the eyes of ordinary people. As for the man and the woman, it was hard to imagine that they could have human emotions. Why did Lichi conflict with them? Why did even the children from the orphanage, Mr. Li's Haihei and others, end up on the path of the audience? Are the so-called uncle and aunt the dean really so pure and innocent? There are some things that cannot be explained clearly, and it is difficult to explain clearly for the time being, but looking at what the real me did to myself last time, we can see some clues. This guy has always been hiding like a bitch, but yet, she has the indignation of a deeply resentful woman, and the previous demonstration and ridicule of herself clearly demonstrated this mentality. It's just a pity that the gap between him and himself will only get wider and wider. If Subai is a magpie's nest, then this body and this identity have actually been lived out in Subai's own style for a long time. He, the real one, will only continue forever, or even forever. Land is labeled false. Perhaps, it was precisely because of his helplessness and anger towards this reality that he couldn't help but jump out to show off his presence last time. I'm looking forward to it if you can't help but keep jumping out next time. Subai blew out a smoke ring and said with a smile on his lips, I'm also looking forward to it. The person I want to meet at the dinner tonight is really you. When Subai and the others returned to Lao Fang's house, it was already 3 o'clock in the morning. Tomorrow's news should be about a sudden fire in a certain community. Fortunately, the firefighters arrived in time to control the fire. At the same time, enthusiastic neighbors notified nearby residents in time. Casualties were avoided. The three of them rested quickly after returning home. After all, this day was indeed a bit busy. Even the brains that the fat man had brought back for a late-night snack were too lazy to cook for the time being, and were stored for the day before eating. When it was almost noon the next day, Subai opened his eyes, lay on the bed and stretched out. Perhaps, in Lao Fang's home, protected by the formation, with monk Fatty Gyatso and Jixiang around him, and able to smell the milky fragrance of his son, under these conditions. Only by yourself can you truly fall asleep deeply. All in all, I had a very comfortable sleep. When I woke up, the little guy was playing with blocks by himself next to Subai. The bed was uneven, so the building blocks were naturally difficult to put up, and they would fall off every time they got a little higher. However, the little guy never tired of playing and seemed to be very interested. When Subai woke up, the little guy immediately crawled to his daddy. His two white and tender little feet were pushing on the quilt, his arms were around Subai's neck, and his delicate face was rubbing against Subai's chest. Subai suddenly felt distressed in his heart. It seems that for a long time, I have gotten much more from this child than what I have given to him. This child gave me peace and left the last piece of pure softness deep in my heart, and I did seem a little irresponsible towards him sometimes. Of course, this is also because the little guy has always been very sensible. After rubbing the little guy's head, Subai looked at this cute face carefully. You are my son, Subai, and your name is Suyukshuan. Subai said it very seriously, because he thought of the last story world where he personally judged the blood corpse and the ridiculous reincarnation. It would be impossible to say that he didn't feel a little upset. But, no matter where you come from, no matter what your true identity is, no matter what is the reason why Jixiang cares for you so much, I only recognize you as my son. Meow. A cat meowed from under the bed, and Subai saw Jixiang rolling his eyes at him. Obviously, the voiceover was that the mentally retarded man had gone crazy as soon as he woke up. Have you washed up? Subai looked at Jixiang, consciously asking the little guy if he had washed up. Jixiang nodded. In the past, Subai often did these things, such as helping the little one wash and take a bath. Now Subai rarely does it. Jixiang basically takes care of everything, unless occasionally Subai's father's love bursts out and takes the little one with him. Guys take a bath together. After picking up the little guy, Subai walked out of the bedroom. In the living room, the fat man had obviously just woken up and was eating a bowl of noodles. Seeing Subai come out, the fat man shouted, "Dabai, I used a small formation at home yesterday to seal the moss dumpling and the brain. But when I got up in the morning, I found that those two things were gone." Gone. Subai's first reaction was that it was stolen, but it was impossible to think about it. Who could come here to steal things? Even if you are an advanced listener, it is not feasible to sneak in here quietly and steal things. But then, Subai found that Fatty's mood was exceptionally stable, and he became even more uncertain. Fatty was famous for his miser character. The two trophies he brought back after so much trouble yesterday were stolen. How could this guy still be here leisurely? Eat noodle? Have a fever? The fat man glanced at Subai helplessly, put down the noodle bowl, sighed, and said with some trepidation, "Ask your cat. It's impossible for outsiders to do it. Monk and I don't have to do this. You and Gyatso don't understand the formation, so your cat can do it. When we rearranged the formation, your cat is used as a formation eye, it can open all the formations and restrictions in the house." Obviously, the fat man had already guessed who did it, so he didn't lose his temper because of it. "Where did you take those two things?" Subai looked at Jixiang and asked. Jixiang glared at the fat man unkindly, meaning that the young man dared to complain. The fat man pretended not to notice and continued to drink the noodle soup. Immediately, Jixiang walked to the floor-to-ceiling window of the living room with cat steps, stretched out his paw and pressed on the window. Subai came over with the little guy in his arms, and the fat man quickly put down his bowls and chopsticks and followed him. Instinctively, the fat man also knew that Jixiang could not have eaten the brain and the moss dumplings secretly. This black cat bee has always been very good. It's high, but it can't do things like ordinary domestic cats like to steal food. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window is a flower garden. It's here. There was a newly dug pit, and a moss ball was placed in the pit. At the same time, the brain ball was torn into pieces and covered around it. The fat man swallowed and looked at Jixiang at his feet in disbelief. "You planted it?" Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 606. Can it grow? Fatty asked worriedly. If it doesn't grow, wouldn't it be a big loss? Although the fat man is looking forward to growing more, he can pick one and take it with him every time he goes out to fight others or enters the story world. The effect is no worse than a magic scroll, and it is better to teach him to fish than to teach him to fish. It would be great if this thing could be grown in batches. At this time, the monk also walked into the living room and saw Subai and Fatty standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. He also walked over and took a look, and he understood what happened. Even the fat man can actually see it. Naturally, the monk won't have much entanglement in his mind. It's just a supper for everyone anyway. It can nourish the mental power, and the effect is not very big. So, the effect of the moss dumpling is certainly impressive. Although Subai was caught off guard at the time, it was already considered an incredible thing to be able to break through Subai's body instantly and affect Subai's mind at the same time. However, the amount of the thing was too small, even if it was auspicious. It's not a big loss to dig a hole with a cat's paw and plant them there and then get nothing. Furthermore, there is an interactive relationship between gain and loss. If you want to gain, you must first learn to lose temporarily. Both the fat man and the monk understand this truth. But today the monk seemed a little more emotional than before, and said, "I don't know who will live in this house in 10 or 20 years. By then, maybe a big tree will grow here, get some shade." "A big tree? Covered with this moss? Shade? Excuse me. Are you kidding me? When you get shade under this thing to escape the heat, and a gust of wind blows over, why don't we all just decompose it into fertilizer together?" The fat man looked at the monk as if he had taken the wrong medicine today. Subai smiled and said, "There is a loquat tree in the courtyard. My wife planted it when she died. Now it is like a canopy." This is the last passage in Gui Yiguang's Xiang Jixuanji. It is widely circulated and is used to symbolize a kind of change in things and people and the memory of his deceased wife. Here, it shows a kind of my own remembrance. Because as the monk said, 10 years later, 20 years later, maybe he and the others are already dead. I just don't know, if there is another generation in the future, after the next generation of listeners discover this place and live in Laofang's house, they see the plants growing, and secretly rejoice that they have obtained a terrible crop, will they think the same thing? I think about who lived here and planted these. This feeling is similar to that of Suner, who had chosen the cemeteries for the three of them in advance. "That's enough for both of you," the fat man shrugged, with an expression that said, "I can't stand you two anymore. It's so early in the morning. Let's create a barren atmosphere." At this time, Subai's cell phone rang. It was a WeChat voice request from Ji Zhen. Subai pressed the answer button. "Hello. I'm a busy man. You promised to help me last time. Are you free?" Last time, before the train station sarcoma incident, Xie Zhen told Subai and Fatty that he would go to the basement of Liang Sen's villa to help him unlock the seal of his boss's clone. However, after that incident, Subai had been busy, not entering his own. The story world of Jin Suner is the story world of Jin Suner, so it was delayed all of a sudden. "Your boss, hasn't he returned to Shanghai yet?" Subai asked. Logically speaking, it has been so long since the train station incident, so Liang Sen should be back. "No, he is preparing for the next story world. He is still in the northeast. He may have discovered something in the old forests of the northeast. If he comes back, I won't dare to mention it to you. What Xie Zhen said is the truth. If Liang Sen has returned to Shanghai, it is naturally impossible for Xie Zhen to secretly attack Liang Sen's sealed clone. As for why Xie Zhen insists on cheating his boss, in Subai it seems that it should be out of love. It may be very uncomfortable for Xie Zhen to see his boss, whom he has always been proud of as his goal in life, so afraid, so cowed, and so unbearable in front of the broadcast. After all, whether in real life or in his audience career, Liang Sen was his eldest brother and a mentor. But maybe it was because he saw his mentor's ugly appearance that he wanted to let him return to the image in your mind, unblock Liang Sen's clone, so that Liang Sen can no longer suppress his own strength. He will soon be noticed by the broadcaster, as long as he is on the broadcast's small book. Basically the following: Liang Sen couldn't help but face the matter. "Let's talk tomorrow," Subai said. "Isn't it possible today?" Xie Zhen said with some surprise. "I'm on the elevated road now. I'm almost at your house. I originally thought of turning in directly." "I have an appointment tonight," Subai said. "Haha, don't bother me then, just tomorrow." Subai suddenly had a thought and said, "Shall we come together?" "Why did you ask me to make your appointment?" Xie Zhen asked, a little surprised. "Is it among ordinary people or among the audience?" Among ordinary people Subai didn't hide it. Haha, Ji Zhen laughed twice, obviously the meaning was obvious. But there's a good chance that unexpected people will show up. How unexpected? Xie Zhen asked perfunctorily. He thought Subai was introducing him to some artist or a special person among ordinary people. He really had no interest in this. A person who can evade broadcast tracking, Subai said. As soon as he finished speaking, Subai heard the breathing on the other side of the phone suddenly stagnant. At the same time, Subai also felt the expressions of the monk and fat man beside him change. Like a blood corpse, Xie Zhen asked speculatively, it's a bit prickly. Obviously, Xie Zhen is really unwilling to jump into a pit like blood corpse. This guy massacred all the senior listeners in Shaanxi, making the entire Eastern listener circle feel like a formidable enemy, and the atmosphere changed. In fact, everyone they were all thankful that the guy didn't come to their city, otherwise they might not be able to survive. Compared to her, the blood corpse is just childish. Subai paused and continued, at least, she succeeded, while the blood corpse failed. 20 minutes later. There were 5 people sitting on the sofa in the living room of Lao Fang's house. Xie Zhen was holding a cup of instant coffee, the monk was holding tea, Gyatso was spinning an ancient knife and coins in his hand, the fat man had a cup of coke in front of him, and Subai was lighting a cigarette. Just now, Subai told the whole thing from beginning to end. The fat man knew about this, but not in such detail. The monk and Gyatso had also heard about it, but Xie Zhen had no idea at all. Haha, I have gained a lot of experience this time. I have seen the second generation of rich people, the second generation of officials and the second generation of dismantling people. I actually met a second generation of listeners here, Xie Sun joked. Strictly speaking, I am not their son. I just live in their son's body, Subai explained. There is no difference. Xie Zhen shook his head, this body may not have been yours before, but since you said you changed it when you were about 7 years old, you only entered the story world when you were about 23 years old. Before entering the story world, you actually stayed in this body for many years longer than the original owner. In addition, after entering the story world, you transformed and strengthened this body, and it has already been marked with yours brand. This is your body, and your name is Subai. Thank you for the chicken soup. Subai shook the ashes, but at this time, Subai didn't need chicken soup. If Subai couldn't understand this, then he wouldn't be sitting here now. When he first learned the truth, Subai did feel that his worldview had collapsed, and he also doubted the meaning of his existence. However, Subai was a very extreme person and a mental patient. This seemed to have become a kind of his detoxifying medicine, is sometimes a fact that ordinary people and even the audience find difficult to accept. Subai was stunned for a while and then slowly returned to normal. Fatty knew this best. He was comforting Dabai half a day ago. And in the second half of the day I found that Dabai seemed to be a normal person again. So, what you mean is that you want us to help you? When you go to the appointment, we will set up nearby to catch your mother. Oh no, sorry, catch the clues of that woman, Xie Zhen asked. I'm afraid you won't agree, Subai said. I agree, how could I disagree, Xie Zhen said firmly. Haha, Dabai, after drinking this cup of coke, we have become friends. Friends, we have to help each other. The fat man stood up and patted Subai's shoulder affectionately. You didn't tell me before. This thing about me is too foreign. The monk put down the flat teacup, and Gyatso stopped turning the ancient knife coins. They both smiled slightly. Obviously, they also decided to participate. The blood corpse before that, Subai reminded. The blood corpse is different from this woman. The shock, fear, and threat the blood corpse poses to us are real and we can feel it, Xie Zhen explained. So if we are asked to fight against the blood corpse, people, we really lack interest because we all want to continue living, but this woman is obviously more advanced and scarier than the bloody corpse. It is precisely because she stands higher, So tall that we can not even touch it, but can even look up at it. Not a trace. That's why we have the courage to touch the tiger's beard. What else? Subai knew that they had another reason for not saying anything. Fatty said with a smile at this time, as long as we find a little clue, even a little clue like a fingernail, then the radio will know it. Do you remember the last time about the blood corpse? It was shouted through my mouth. The identity of the bloody corpse was confirmed through the broadcast of Yezi's name. If we can find a little clue, even if we just capture the vague silhouette of the woman. So, this is equivalent to helping the broadcasters a lot, and it is more effective than doing most real-life tasks to flatter the broadcasters. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 607. This wave of good feelings is not easy to win over, Subai reminded. In fact, it was indeed a reminder, because no matter how Subai used words to describe it, maybe Fatty and the others could not understand that woman's feelings more deeply than he did. It means horror. Because it's not easy to brush, that's why I want to give it a try, Fatty said, and then he looked around. For example, on some live broadcast platforms there are often anchors playing some kind of haunted house adventure, that is, looking for a bad guy with less people. He just goes into a building or an uninhabited place to create some atmosphere. If he really knew that there was a ghost inside that could kill people, would he still dare to go in and live broadcast? But, the truth is indeed as what the fat man said, the monk agreed. It is precisely because that woman is so much scarier than the bloody corpse, but there is no trace of it even on the radio, so we are willing to try it. If it is really a direct threat similar to the blood corpse, then we would not dare to try it. Gyatso nodded. Oh, the most important thing about co-writing is participation, Subai teased. Okay, you can make a plan yourself. Although you may not even be able to catch a hair in the end, it is still a very challenging thing. If we don't go to the appointment tonight, we can mobilize more powers, Yezhen said with some regret. I am relatively familiar with the administrator of the forum. Through the forum, we can contact some people who are suitable for participating in the action. Audience, the success rate will at least be higher by then. Think too much, and there are too many people, which makes it boring, Fatty retorted without mercy. After all, this is Dabai's own private matter. It's already the limit for the few of us to mess around in it. If it would be inappropriate to call more people to come. Okay, Subai put out the cigarette butt in the ashtray. Bring out the charter yourself. Anyway, I've told you the location of the hotel. Arrange the formations where you should, and stay behind when you should. I'm going to change my clothes first. After all, it's the first time I'm meeting my brother-in-law, so I have to be serious. Wait a minute, Subai, I have another question, Ji Zhen said. If your brother-in-law is hidden very deeply, how can you determine his identity? Subai waved his hand while walking towards the bedroom. He will definitely be killed in the end, so there is no need for any other tests. The others were stunned for a moment. Suddenly, they deeply realized that no matter how calm Subai looked on the surface, in fact, he cared more about this matter than anyone imagined, and even that angry emotion had already made him decide. I made the decision that I would rather kill by mistake than miss. Although this is in line with the egoistic logic of the audience, it has never been Subai's style of painting. Driving Fatty's Audi, Subai arrived at the door of the hotel. This time he had some money in his pocket. After giving a tip, he asked the waiter to help him stop the car, and he walked into the elevator under the guidance of another waiter. Facing the mirror in the elevator, Subai straightened his collar. He originally wanted to wear a suit, but after thinking about it, he decided not to. After all, in the impression of his aunt and cousin, he was a business failure. If he's still wearing a crisp suit to go to the appointment, The two women who were really good to them might feel that their invitation to Subai to go to the appointment actually put a lot of pressure on Subai, who had to save face even though he was in despair. Therefore, Subai wore his usual casual clothes. In fact, after not wearing a suit for too long, he would feel a little uncomfortable wearing a suit again. Although Subai had long made up his mind to kill the so-called brother-in-law, Subai still cared about the feelings of his aunt and cousin. Although he wanted to kill their son-in-law and husband, Subai felt that these two things were not important. The influence is not antagonistic either. Maybe, this was what Chu Zhao couldn't stand Subai the most at the beginning, but Subai had no intention of changing it. "Sir, it's in private room 606 right in front. Is there anything else you need?" "No thanks. Wish you a pleasant meal," the waiter withdrew politely. Subai walked to the door of the private room and knocked on the door. "Is my cousin here?" It was my cousin who opened the door. "Cousin, come in quickly." In the private room, there was only my cousin, not my aunt and the so-called brother-in-law. The cousin explained, "My mother went to the hospital to visit a friend, and the guy from my family drove her there. She will be here soon. I am waiting for you here, cousin." "I'm sorry." "Fine." Subai smiled and sat down. "This is the 6th floor. Next to the window, there is a pedestrian street below. It is brightly lit. It is indeed a good place to dine." "Cousin, what do you like to eat?" my cousin said, holding the menu. "Let's order the dishes first." "I'm not picky about food," Subai shrugged, indicating that he was casual. After ordering, the waiter came in and poured drinks. In the private room, there were still two people, Subai and her cousin. I asked him about the jewelry last time, and he said he just bought them from a friend who is in the jade business in Myanmar. He only thought they looked good, and he didn't expect them to be harmful to the body. If my brother-in-law is not in this industry, he certainly doesn't know the ropes of this industry. I don't blame him. Well, I can only hope that he will be smarter next time. The cousin spoke more casually. Obviously, although he didn't have much contact with Subai, he still regarded Subai as one of his family members. What's more, Subai used to send some gifts to his aunt and cousin during festivals, which were expensive. In fact, this impression had been established long ago, and neither his aunt nor his cousin were superficial and materialistic women. Therefore, even though Subai is now down and out in their eyes, they still treat the family relationship between Subai and them more sincerely. However, Subai was a little unsure about how long it would take for them to come. Subai was really looking forward to the meal. In the corridor of the hospital, the fat man was chewing gum and standing by the window at the entrance to breathe. Because of the shortage of hospital beds, even the corridors were filled with beds. Many patients who did not have beds could only lie down temporarily. On the hospital bed in the corridor, the central air conditioner was turned on at high power, so it didn't feel very cold inside, but it gave people a very stuffy feeling. The combination of human body odor, the smell of medicine and the stuffy air really makes people feel very uncomfortable. "Why haven't you come out yet?" The fat man said a little strangely that he had been waiting outside Aunt Subai's house since the afternoon, and then he saw Aunt Subai sitting in the passenger seat of a black car and came to the hospital. The fat man naturally followed him, but it has been almost an hour since I entered the ward, and the process of visiting patients should have ended long ago. As for the man next to Aunt Subai who was wearing a black sweater and jeans, the fat man never captured his face. It seemed that intentionally or unintentionally, the man could always find a hidden angle to hide himself. This made the fat man even more alert. "It's just that it's been too long since I've been in the ward for an hour." Picking up the phone, Fatty was about to send a message to the WeChat group, which meant that the goal was very likely to be established. Regardless of whether this guy was real or not, an ordinary person or the real Subai, Dabai planned to do it anyway. He was dropped with a click, and the fat man didn't feel any psychological pressure. Hey, where's the signal? The fat man found that his cell phone had no signal at all. The fat man, who was a little annoyed, simply walked directly to the door of the ward. He wanted to pretend to be passing by accidentally and take a look inside, because the ward doors all have windows, so he could observe some of the conditions inside from the outside. When the fat man walked to the door, he suddenly smelled an extremely strong smell of blood. Grass. The fat man didn't care about anything else and just opened the door. Snapped. The door was pushed open. But there was no one inside. The hospital bed was as clean as new, and the place seemed to have just been cleaned thoroughly, without leaving any dust in the gaps. It was so clean that it even made people feel uncomfortable. Where are people? The fat man keenly sensed something was wrong, and when he was about to retreat, he found that there was also a ward behind him, with the same layout as the one in front of him, and it was so clean that it was suffocating. The middle aisle disappeared silently at this moment. In other words, Fatty is basically trapped here at this time. The fat man took 2 deep breaths. He knew that things were getting particularly interesting. This is the opponent's plan to strike first. Squatting on the ground, Fatty observed the texture of the tiles and drew some lines in his mind. At the same time, a feeling of excitement vaguely rose in Fatty's heart. Does this count as a move against that scary woman? Hee. It's really exciting. However, half an hour later, there were many beads of sweat on the fat man's forehead. He can be sure that the layout of this closed formation is on the lines of the floor tiles. But no matter how much I copy it in my mind, I still can't grasp the trajectory of this formation. This means that the other party's understanding of the formation has completely reached the point where it turns decay into magic for me. It's a simple formation in front of you. You can see it clearly, but it's difficult to decipher it. He reached out and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Like a student who has been blocked by a question for a long time in the examination room. There is not much time left for the exam, but he has been delayed for too long because of this obstacle and has not had time to finish most of the papers. A few moments. The fat man simply sat on the ground, made a fist with one hand and smashed it hard on the floor tiles. He felt a little self-defeating and at a loss. At that moment, the fat man even shouted to the surroundings. Broadcast, broadcast, please answer if you hear it, your loyal fat is trapped, your loyal fat is trapped. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 608. After shouting for a long time, the fat man found that there was no movement. Well, in fact, he was not expecting any movement. He was not Nobita, and the broadcaster was not Tinkerbell. When something happened, he could not shout a broadcast and have a bamboo dragonfly fly over his head. Help you. However, this formation is really painful for Fatty. The formation in front of him was very simple and elementary, but every stroke, every line, and even every detail was completely natural. Fatty couldn't even find any flaws. Breaking a formation is actually a competition between the person who sets up the formation and the one who breaks it, just like the battle of wits and courage between building a tomb and robbing a tomb. The simplest way to break the formation is actually to dig out the loopholes in the opponent's formation and find a breakthrough. Fatty spent half an hour before, but he couldn't find a breakthrough at all. This is almost a kind of attack on him based on his formation attainments. A kind of crushing. No, in Fatty's opinion, it was even more of an insult, and it was an insult that Fatty himself couldn't refute. Subconsciously, the fat man knew that he must find other methods, but at a glance, since the other party had left such a delicate pocket for him to jump into. So, what is the other party's real purpose? When a ghost hunting team is set up to catch ghosts live, they suddenly realize that the ghosts have already washed the dishes and are waiting for you and others to arrive. How does it feel? That scary woman, that white mommy. What to do? Under the clear sky and under the broadcast, she really did not hide like a mouse but chose to take the initiative. What on earth is this woman going to do? On the contrary, the fat man is not too worried about his own safety. The other party seems to have a restraint, that is, to temporarily trap him here without intending to cause any substantial harm to himself. However, despite this, he is being played with. The feeling of control is still unbearable for fat people. Listeners basically have Stockholm Syndrome, that is, after being completely abused by the radio many times, they recognize the status of the radio from the bottom of their hearts, but if there are other people who want to abuse you, then you will definitely violently resist. Whether it is from the perspective of self-esteem, self-confidence, or even the simplest temper, it is unbearable. All values of listeners are based on radio, a distorted and conditional value system. Broadcasting is the criterion for measuring the listener's society, and it is the law that everyone in the listener's social circle acquiesces to or even takes for granted. When someone can escape the law, when someone can avoid the rules, when that person appears in front of you, just like an ordinary person suddenly knows that the person sitting next to him is a fugitive murderer. Fear. Scalp hair mask. Hysteria. The fat man took a deep breath, forced himself to calm down, and bit his lips. Only when blood stains appeared on his lips did the fat man forcefully bury his fear. He spread his hands, and small flags appeared in the fat man's hands. Okay, then I will use the most primitive and stupidest method to break the formation. Hello, sir, this is the private room you ordered, number 605. The dishes you ordered are already being prepared and will be served to you soon. Okay, thank you for your hard work. Xie Zhen handed a note of 100 yuan to the waiter in a familiar manner. His eyes paused on the door number of private room 606, and then walked into his own private room next door. According to the previously made plan, Xie Zhen should not appear here, or in other words, Xie Zhen should not appear so close to 606. But Xie Zhen also has his own opinion. If that Sudbai's brother-in-law is really that person, and if that woman will appear here, then even if he hides in the hotel kitchen or toilet, can he avoid the other party's eyes? How can it be? So, why not sit here quietly, sit in the closest position, eat some steak and drink some red wine, and be ready to touch the tiger's beard? Why should you wrong yourself? Dong dong dong. Please come in. A waiter came in pushing a dining cart and placed plates of covered dishes on the table. When the waiter turned around and was about to leave, Xie Zhen suddenly said, "Stop." The waiter stood motionless, but soon, the waiter turned around and faced the court again. "Brother, do you need any other services?" Xie Zhen smiled calmly, "No more." The waiter nodded and left the private room. Xie Zhen looked at the dishes in front of him, but did not touch it. He did not even touch the knife and fork. When the waiter came in, Xie Zhen clearly noticed that there seemed to be a strange smell in the air. This is not the taste of food, nor the taste of wine. It's very fragrant, but not overpowering, making it refreshing and not cloying at all. Xie Zhen's fingers tapped lightly on the table. As an existence that is infinitely close to the advanced listener, although the listeners who recognize their existence in the outside world think that they are only one step away from becoming a senior listener, only Xie Zhen knows that to be promoted to a senior listener, he only needs to integrate one thing. The natal weapon is actually not difficult. It can even be said to be just a process that is so simple that the accumulation of quantitative changes finally turns into qualitative changes. Of course, the accumulation of quantitative changes also depends on talent. Some people have relatively high talents and may have completed the accumulation of quantitative changes very early. For example, the four guys living in Laofang's house, in Xie Zhen's opinion, the talents of those four people and Xingxing, they are destined to become outstanding listeners at a certain level. Therefore, after they have completed the accumulation of quantitative changes early, they even have the leisure to stop temporarily to search, think, and choose which magic weapon they choose to fuse. Become your own weapon. This feeling is very similar to the practical etiquette of Kanglin. Having already achieved a well-off life very early, you can naturally choose the delicacies on your table patiently. It is not like those listeners who are not good in qualifications and have bad temperament, who are rushing to catch up. After finally completing the accumulation of quantitative changes, I found a magic weapon and couldn't wait to fuse it. I was already several steps behind others. To fuse another magic weapon that was not so scientific for my future development would be to let others down again. However, advancing from a senior listener to an advanced listener is completely different. It is no longer a simple process of accumulating quantitative changes to triggering qualitative changes, but requires an opportunity and a state of mind. This state of mind is similar to breaking out of one's shell and being reborn. Courage. After all, high-level listeners are fundamentally different from non-high-level listeners, both in terms of their abilities and their treatment on the radio. Xie Zhen once asked Liang Sen, who had just been promoted to senior audience, what the secret was. Liang Sen's answer was fearless. It's just a pity. In fact, logically speaking, Xie Zhen should have tried to break through a long time ago, but Xie Zhen knew that he would not succeed. There is a saying that success is the same as failure. Xie Zhen has been following Liang Senator, naturally able to learn from Liang Sen's experience. It will definitely be faster and faster than others. However, it was precisely because he witnessed Liang Sen huddled at the foot of his desk, trembling and crying when the broadcasting atmosphere came, that it was difficult for Xie Zhen to muster the courage to really take that step. That was the shadow from Liang Senator. That scene was actually a huge obstacle blocking Xie Zhen's progress. This is also the reason why Xie Zhen asks Subai and Fatty to break the seal of Liang Sen's clone in Liang Sen's villa. Perhaps, he is only suitable to be Liang Sen's assistant, whether in the game company or in the audience circle. Yes, he has become accustomed to being Liang Sen's shadow. Therefore, only by forcing Liang Sen to face the radio again and regaining the courage to face everything, as a shadow, can he have the opportunity and possibility to be promoted to a high-level listener. The smell was slowly dissipating, but the warning signs in Xie Zhen's heart did not decrease at all. Very few people know what the real enhancement and trump card of Ji Zhen are. In fact, his enhancement is exactly the same as what he does in the real world. Online games weave an illusory world for players, and the real enhancement of Ji Zhen is also an illusion. The method of administering the medicine is actually very simple. It couldn't be simpler. It is a drug that is similar to the sweat medicine in martial arts TV series. It can be as low level as you want. It has nothing to do with mental strength or environmental impact. I won't stir up your emotions, I won't look for flaws in your soul. Just drugging you. However, when he noticed the fragrance, Xie Zhen was shocked to find that he had woken up too late. When he shouted to the waiter to stop, he glanced out the window with a worried look. This was the 6th floor. Outside was a commercial street. But when he looked over at that time, the commercial street was above and the black night was below. Drugged. It has taken effect. And myself. It has already been tricked. Xie Zhen closed his eyes, and he began to force himself to wake up, constantly communicating with his subconscious mind. This is a dream, this is a dream, this is fake, damn, wake up, wake up, wake up. Sir, the dishes are ready, do you have any other instructions? The waiter asked Xie Zhen. But Ji Zhen didn't respond. He just sat sideways on the chair and glanced out the window, his eyes deep and calm. Then I'll go down first. If you have any instructions, please ring the bell. The waiter swore in his mind that he was another arrogant guy and then pushed the empty dining cart out of the private room. When they arrived at the elevator entrance, the elevator door just opened, and there stood a middle-aged lady wearing a blue cheongsam and a young man inside. The waiter quickly stepped aside to let the guests inside get out of the elevator first. Mom, don't worry, Aunt Lee is just a minor surgery, there is no big problem. But I'm still very nervous. Forget it, Ziobai. After your Aunt Lee's operation is over, you can accompany your mother to the hospital to visit her again.